trigger control, do you practice it? Do you need it? What is it? Let's try to give my 2 cents on it. There seems to be a debate going on about whether you slap the trigger or whether you actually trigger prep. And do you actually need to do both? Like, what is that? So my 2 cents on it and how I actually how I like to train it personally and how I like to teach others is I want the ability to do both. Why not? Why would you limit yourself to only being able to do one thing in every situation? Why not practice and expand both of those skills so that you're able to perform those skills on demand, whatever situation, whether it be a competition, self-defense shooting, police shooting, whatever it is. Like, you're able to do what the situation requires of you without a second thought because you practice it in your training. Okay, so there's two kind of camps. I said slapping and trigger control, and I'll be sitting in the middle. But let's talk about both of those. So slapping, in my head, is referring to the point where there is no discernible difference between, there's no staging of the trigger, I think would be a better way to say it, where when the decision to fire has been fired, you go bam. Like, there is no go to the wall, touch the trigger. There is just like, I'm slapping now. Generally, what I would say would be like the first shot out of the holster on a really, really fast draw. If you're having 0.5, 0.7, 0.8 draws, I would be very curious to see, I would be very hesitant to say that you are any amount of prepping that trigger. You're probably slapping that trigger. As well as if you're having 14, 15, 12 splits, probably not a lot of prep going on. That's probably where you're coming straight off the trigger after the reset. Either you're going completely off the trigger or you're following the trigger perfectly. It doesn't really matter in my opinion, and then coming straight back. Okay, there's no hesitation at the wall. A trigger prep, in my opinion, would be some amount of hesitation at the wall of the trigger. Okay, where you go from I'm about to fire, I'm about to fire, my fire, I'm about to fire, fire. That's kind of how I would kind of say it. How I like to practice it personally is I like to kind of conceptualize it as my finger is always doing the same thing. As soon as I present my gun out, my finger goes to the trigger, to the wall of the trigger. And that's really, really easy to do in dry fire. You just practice that pointing at a freaking wall, on a piece of tape on a wall, and just practice going straight to the wall of the trigger. Now, some guns have very, very light walls, and so that might be kind of hard to particularize. The CZ was that for me because it was a double action first, but then the single action it was very hard and wasn't very defined. The Glock is very, very defined. If you pull that thing out of the holster, that's the wall. There is no second guessing that. So my finger always goes to the wall, no matter the presentation. How long it stays on the wall, that is what I'm most concerned about. Okay. Now, there's a correlation between how long it stays on the wall and how refined of a sight picture I need. Those two, I would believe, are kind of in sync and together. Because let's say I don't really need a refined sight picture, well, then there's no need for me to be on the wall any longer than I need to be. However, if I'm already taking the time to clean up my sights a little bit, well, then I'm probably going to hesitate more at the wall so that when I'm ready to break the shot, I've already have all the extra amount of distance pulled already out. Because if I'm cleaning up my sights with my finger here, that does no purpose at all, because as soon as I do this, my sights are going to move unless I have a freaking monster grip or whatever it is. So if I'm going to clean up my sights, I might as well be here because as soon as my sights are good, bam, I can pull the trigger. Whoop-de-doo. So that's kind of trigger control. I see a lot of people teach trigger control or grip and not kind of both. And I would say, just like I'm saying, I want to be able to slap and have trigger prep. I want to be able to have amazing grip and have amazing trigger control so that whenever the situation arises where I have to lessen one or the other, or I just have a bad day where I'm not doing good grip, my trigger control saves me. Or it's a bad day where I'm not having good trigger control, my grip saves me, okay? Why not just train everything so that whenever you suck at one thing, everything else saves you? So if I am going to slap the trigger, you probably need to have a really, really good grip, because if not, you'll just have this gun just wobbling all over. But you have a stacked grip, you could be slapping that trigger all day long. Versus if you have a real weak hand, you don't even have to have a hand, I can still pull this trigger and have the gun not move at all. It's really, really simple to do if I'm going from the wall of the trigger. What's hard to do is if I go from here, my gun moves. Okay? That's just the fact of life. You're moving things, and those things are going to move unless you have other forces, your support hand, counteracting those pressures or counteracting those movements and forces. Or you lessen those forces by going to the wall of the trigger and then pulling from there. So that's kind of my opinion on that. I like the ability to do both instead of one or the other. I don't think the question needs to be one or the other. I think it needs to be more of a question of which one do you train more. And I definitely lean towards I train more of a prep trigger because that's just, I like shooting more distance. It's more fun for me. That's something I needed to work on in the future, is doing more speed shooting, more really, really fast, slapping the trigger really, really up close. But I mean, you play around with what works for you. I find it very hard to kind of hear people and kind of think that, okay, yeah, they understand that whenever they're talking about slapping a 25-yard partial or a 15-yard head box or so on and so forth. Like, I don't think that's entirely the case. And additionally, I don't think the same people, or not same people, different people who say, I prep my trigger every single shot, and then I see them drop an 18 split, and I'm like, I guarantee you that's not a prep shot. So be careful of what people are saying about absolutes, and practice what works for you, and give it a shot.